From TeachIllinois.com, this is The Teacher's Classroom, the podcast that explores current issues and topics in education and how they relate to teaching and students. Here is your host, Matt Weld.
Hello and welcome to episode 19 of The Teacher's Classroom. Today we're going to be talking about, a whole range of things. I'm excited for this conversation. We're going to be talking about the future of work. We're going to be talking about the difference between training and professional development. And we're going to be talking about successful schools. This is a wide-ranging conversation with Eric Patnoudes. He is I met him, I guess, through Twitter quite a while ago, and we've connected at conferences and the like. And the conversation is always very interesting with Eric. So Eric currently is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Otis, which is a student performance platform made specifically for K-12 students and teachers. He's a former education strategist at CDWG and also has experience as an adjunct, a special education teacher, and an instructional technologist. So Eric, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. It's good to be here.
So when we were kind of bouncing ideas back and forth about what we should talk about today, a lot of things came to the forefront, but I think something that we as educators often forget to look at is our big why. Like, why are we doing all these things in the classroom with computers? Why are we teaching social emotional learning? We are preparing kids to be functioning adults. And part of that is working. We always ask people when we first meet them, what do you do? And so part of the thing that I'd like to talk about today is kind of a conversation about the future of work. So I found an article on Forbes, and I will put the link in the notes for this podcast. And it said, the first quote that really struck me was that about 60% of all occupations, 1/3 of that 60% could be automated. What is your response to that?
Right. And I think could be is important in that quote. And the reason why is because there's a lot of things that could happen between now and then. There's policies that need to change in order for those jobs to be automated. And I think it's a matter of time before that happens. But I certainly think there's going to be an awful lot of jobs that are automated. The one thing that really sticks out to me that maybe doesn't get as much attention in education, at least, is that automation is going to eliminate jobs. It will also create a bunch of new jobs. It'll be a smaller percentage of jobs, but the key here is that a lot of these newly created jobs are going to require technical and very highly skilled workers, and those workers will be nothing like the jobs that they're replacing. And with that being said, that's certainly going to have an impact on education and the type of students that we need to be producing in our schools.
Well, I keep hearing reports on the news that, with all the automation and sending jobs overseas, that there's going to be a glut of people looking for work, and yet the jobless rate is at an all-time low. So somehow, and this is probably more of an economics conversation, but it seems like there's going to be jobs, probably creating those automated jobs.
Yeah, exactly. Repairing and maintaining the robots that are automating the jobs, right? I mean, that's going to be a huge thing. But those certainly aren't going to be minimum wage jobs, right? I mean, a lot of the jobs that are going to be automated are, we're already seeing this. Like, my Chase Bank, they don't even have tellers in the lobby anymore. A lot of it is all done through ATMs. You look at some recent technology like Amazon Go. where, you literally, I went to the first one on September 27th in Chicago. I'm sorry, it's not the first Amazon Go, but the first outside of Seattle. And you scan your phone, you walk in, you grab what you want. Through machine learning, it automatically knows what you put in your cart, and you literally just walk out of the store. You don't even pay. And then you get a notification saying that here's the 5 items that you bought. Your account's been charged this much money, and you're on your way. And so point being, those types of low skill jobs are going to be the first ones to go. The ones that come back in return are certainly not going to be those jobs of cashiers and bank tellers and things like that. So, in education, I think, I'm not the first person to say this by any means, but we need to start teaching kids skills that technology can't do. Otherwise, we're preparing them for a future that doesn't exist.
Right. Well, the article went on to say that there are some groups of jobs that would not be replaced by machines. And it's obviously those that rely on a lot of people-to-people things, or creativity, for example, was one of them, like research and academic jobs. And then ones like you were talking about that deal with dexterity, the engineers, but also plumbers. We still need people to build our houses, and I don't think that's going to be done by robots anytime soon.
Right. Although I could share a video with you of a robot that's hanging drywall, and it was kind of clunky, but the amount of engineering that went into creating this robot that was literally hanging drywall was pretty darn impressive.
Well, and I've seen, I'm huge on botany and horticulture and agriculture and that kind of stuff. And there are robots that do farming.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. Well, I think so. There's the robots that do almost like greenhouse kind of farming, which I just saw from the World Economic Forum. But even today, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the farming machines are done autonomously. Farmers are just kind of sitting in the tractor, riding along, making sure something doesn't go wrong. But for the most part, the tractors are driving themselves. And I think the same could be even be said for airplanes, as far as I understand. That the pilots are kind of there for worst case scenario, but for the most part, the planes are flying themselves already.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think teachers are always going to be around. People are always asking me, so, what do you think? Is online learning, are these devices going to replace us anytime soon? And I can't believe that. I think, education is a social thing. And we learn best by face-to-face interactions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Learning is definitely a social process. There's a great video that is on YouTube on the channel Veritasium. Derek Muller is the guy behind that channel, and he's got this video. It's called "This Will Revolutionize Education," and it goes back, through all of the attempts to revolutionize education, all the way back to people who thought that the phonograph was going to somehow revolutionize education, up to things like microfiche. And, he's like, do you remember when that was going to revolutionize education? And then he's like, how about laser discs and DVDs? Remember that was going to revolutionize education? And then he goes into this really interesting aspect of how, learning happens between people who feel safe among each other, who feel like, the educator cares about them. When those kinds of conditions don't exist, and you're sitting in front of just a computer by yourself, if that worked to the degree that some people are afraid of, you would have seen much greater adoption of MOOCs when they first started coming around.
The massive open online
courses. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Massive open online courses. I think, you would have seen more participation in those. So, will teachers be replaced by machines? I don't think so. There's actually a great website. If you Google, will robots take my job? You go to the site and you type in any job that you can think of, and then it gives you a percent of the chance that your job will be automated by a robot. And teachers, it's like 0.09% chance that they'll be replaced. So we're safe.
Good. At least according to that website. But no,
according to that website, yeah. If it's on the internet,
you're right. 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 But I think the idea of work that you and I have, and I'm older than you are. So like when I was going to school, the job I have, it didn't even exist, you know? And so I know that we are preparing kids for jobs that absolutely don't exist, that we can't even fathom, because who knew about the sharing economy that's out there now? That article said that 24% of Americans report earning money from the digital platform economy in the last year. So, Etsy or Uber or any one of those, either as a full-time job or as a supplementary income. Yeah.
The term I like is your side hustle.
Right. Hey, I have one.
Yeah. Everybody, more and more people have a side hustle where they're, not doing a ton of work, but, because of technology and its reach, you can put some kind of product out there and, make money, whether it's products that you're creating yourselves or whether you're buying, in bulk from China and then selling it on your own website. I mean, everything in between is happening these days.
Well, I think the 4-Hour Work Week was a revolutionary book for a lot of people. I know it opened my eyes to the potential of, even the remote work. I was talking to a friend of mine this weekend, and she wants to quit her job and just get a remote job so she can travel the world and just still do her job, but she doesn't have to be tied to a physical space. And no one would have thought of that 20 years ago.
No, or you're totally right. Think about there was no YouTube until 2005. That's only 13 years ago. And you look at the people now that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year being a YouTube star.
Well, and that's what every 13-year-old wants to be when they grow up, is a YouTuber.
Yeah, exactly. You ask them what they want to be. They want to be a YouTube star.
Yeah. I don't think they realize all the work that goes on behind the scenes to get that done. But
no, definitely not. Well, and, I think one thing that I like to talk about along this idea of like asking kids what they want to be when they grow up. Again, something that, I didn't come up with, but Jamie Cassup is a person a lot of people in education and technology are familiar with. He's the Google evangelist for education. And he, in his keynotes, always asks or suggests, don't ask kids what they want to be when they grow up. Ask them what problem do they want to solve. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely love that idea. And I think it speaks exactly to this conversation that we're having. Because I think in the future, it's going to be more about your skill set and your outputs than what job you want to have, because kids are going to, maybe not kids, but as these kids become adults, they're going to switch jobs multiple times throughout their career. Nobody's going to work at one company for the next 30 or 40 years and retire with a pension. I mean, that way of doing things is gone.
Right. Well, so that brings us to what successful schools do to prepare these kids. What do you see? I know you've written on this subject. So what do you see as the way to go?
Well, so I think there's two things. I think there's what successful schools are doing today to be successful by our traditional definition of what a school is as we know it. And then there's And then there's what schools could be doing maybe differently or better to prepare kids for the future. So I'll approach the first one first in that there's 5 things that I saw. So when I was an education strategist at CDW, I worked with schools all over the United States and did a lot of strategic planning. I helped them develop professional development programs. I did some classroom and school design. And so in working with all these leadership teams, there were 5 things that I found that these schools had in common that they were doing right today. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to be right for preparing kids for the future, but based on what we're currently working with, these are the things I found that they're doing right. So the first thing is that they make working across silos in a school district a top priority. And this is something I'm sure you can relate with, that, you have your technology department working in one silo, you have curriculum working in another silo, you have administrative, the goals of the administration in another silo, and there's a lack of communication between these silos, and it leads to misaligned goals and vision. And next thing you know, each of these departments is kind of going their own direction, and ultimately they end up going nowhere because of that. So there's some people say we need to remove silos altogether, but silos actually are a good thing, but working across silos is really the key. So really having a unified vision between those different departments in the school is crucial to doing some really good work today. The other thing is, or another aspect of what's working is setting long-term goals and then using backward planning to ensure that those goals are met. So rather than what I saw a lot of was, well, this year we're going to buy laptops and let's wait till we see what happens. And then we'll plan year 2, and then we'll plan year 3, and then year 4, and so on. Where the really successful schools, they say, okay, what do we want our school to look like 5 or 10 years down the road? And they work their way back from that ultimate goal, and they start putting in the structures to make sure that they achieve that longer term outcome. And what that does is it helps to ensure that, let's say we're 2 or 3 years into an initiative, that some new technology comes along, that we don't turn into the dog from that cartoon Up, where he's like squirrel and you get all distracted and you stop doing what you were doing in achieving that long-term goal. You don't get distracted by those things because you have a plan in place and you're going to follow that plan to get to where you want to go. Another thing successful schools do is they really make a point of identifying a difference between training and professional development or professional learning, however you want to say that. So training is, you know where I'm going with that. Mm-hmm. So training is here's the buttons that you push to get the technology to do what you want to do. So, click here to share a Google Doc, click here to assign something in Google Classroom. That's all really helpful, but it's just training. It doesn't make teachers better teachers. It just makes them more proficient at using technology. Where the professional learning or professional development comes in is really that pedagogical approach. So how are we changing the way that we teach to leverage the affordances of technology to yield better outcomes? That's professional learning. And what I saw, I would say 9 out of 10 schools that I worked with, when I said, okay, so number one, that's great. You're going to buy all these Chromebooks. Fantastic. I'm glad you got the money to do that. Tell me more about what professional development is going to look like. And 9 times out of 10, they describe training, and very rarely did they have a plan for professional development. So 2 or 3 years into the initiative, you have some teachers who are really good at Google Apps, but they're still teaching the exact same way they taught 3 years ago before they had the technology. So that creates a ton of problems. And so where I'm going with this then is the really good schools can identify the difference between training and professional development and they prioritize doing both, because you really can't have one without the other. So doing both is really important. And along those lines of professional development is not just for teachers. The successful schools invest in ongoing change leadership for the administration. So the ability to lead change is critical. And so not only, and let me back up, I would maybe make an argument that professional development for administrators is more important than the professional development for the teachers, because they put the conditions in place that enable teachers to be successful. And finally, the last thing that I saw, something else that I very rarely saw, was that a superintendent holds all of their principals accountable for being those champions of change. I was shocked at how many superintendents I would talk to who would say, yeah, Eric, you've got some great ideas and we would love to do that, but I can't get all of my principals on board. And I was like, well, wait a minute, aren't you the superintendent? Like, aren't you the one who determines what the principals do? That's how it works in business. That's how it works in many other industries. Not that there's the end all be all, it's this top down approach. But again, that goes back to that change leadership training, that the superintendent and the principals and other stakeholders come up with a unified vision, and then somebody's holding those principals accountable for implementing those changes. And when one of them is not, in the business world, they're let go. But in education, it just is something that we look past a little too easily. So those are kind of the 5 things that I found most in common with successful schools. And I'll kind of stop there because I've been talking for a while.
Well, along those lines, it seems like a lot of schools, there's a difference between leaders and managers. And it seems like, I don't know if it's a lack of personnel to get everything done, but it seems like many schools are lacking the visionary leadership. In what you were describing, it was a superintendent who would then hold everybody accountable to be the change agents. But I think sometimes everybody's so worried about, are the buses running? Do we have enough money for payroll, that they don't take the time to reflect and look at those long range goals that you were talking about, so they can have a 5-year plan instead of a 5-month plan.
Yeah, no, you're right. And don't, I hope that doesn't come off as me being judgmental of these, different positions in school, because you're right. There are buses to run. There's kids to make sure that they're safe.
Oh, no, I didn't think you were being judgmental. I've noticed that before, in talking to people that, they get caught in the process and miss the product type of thing. So
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And so I guess the big takeaway for me is that many times, the things that school districts say that they can't afford, they don't have the resources, or they don't have the money to do, are the exact same things that are going to help them achieve what they want to achieve. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways, we're getting in our own way. Like, if we could make the time and the money for the professional development for teachers, for the change leadership strategies for the leadership, then they will accomplish what they want to accomplish. But instead, a lot of times it's, well, we don't have time or money for that.
Right.
And that's just really frustrating.
Yeah. All right. So in looking then toward, we're kind of broaching this topic already about what schools should look like in the future. Right.
So that's kind of the second thing I wanted to get at. So that's kind of the first thing, right? Those are the things that successful schools are doing based on what's happening today, right? Mm-hmm. But I think there's also that shift towards, well, what should we be doing differently to prepare kids for this unknown future? And I did get to go visit with some really progressive schools. A lot of times Those happen to be charter schools because they don't have the same constraints as public education with like the testing, for example, and some of those things. So that isn't to say that, I really think it's public education is working within the constraints that they have. Policymakers are certainly not helping in a lot of different circumstances. I also think that something else holding us back is just our priorities as a society and the things that we value. Certainly, teachers don't get enough respect for the work that they do. But I think in terms of what kinds of changes need to take place in order to move things in the right direction, so that we are preparing kids for this future, I think there's a couple of things that come to my mind right away. I think we need to stop sorting kids by age. There's no reason that, I think Ken Robinson says that there's no reason why we should sort kids by the date of that they're, I forget how he says it, but like their date of manufacturing or something like that. He's kind of like a play on industry. So like, there's no reason why we should simply sort kids just based on how old they are. And in that, there's a lot of benefits that come along with it. And it's actually something that they do in Montessori. I happen to have 4 kids in Montessori school, and the mixed age classrooms is really one of my favorite parts because I have an 8-year-old who's in class with 12-year-olds. And if my 8-year-old is really advanced at doing math, well, he can sit down next to a 10-year-old and they're doing the same work and they don't think anything about it. It's just, it's mastery-based education. I don't move on to the next concept until I understand the one that I'm currently working on. So I think that is something that absolutely has to change. I think we need to move away from our traditional grading of points and letter grades to be something that's more standards-based or mastery-based model of education. I taught special education in high school, and here I am trying to teach high school algebra to kids who can't do basic addition or subtraction. It's literally, I'm like, well, we need to go back 8 years to work on these basic concepts before I can even teach you college algebra. Now that's special education, but the same kind of things are happening with your gen ed students.
Right.
In third grade, well, we're going to do the end of chapter test. And when that's done, we're moving on, whether you understood that material or not. I think that absolutely has to stop. So more of a standards or mastery-based approach, I think, is something that we have to do. And then the other thing that comes to mind right away is that we really need to move towards something that's a model of problem or project-based learning that has an authentic audience. And one place that I saw this was at High Tech High in San Diego. These kids have to do a project every 6 to 8 weeks. They need to present their idea for the project to a room full of community members. Their project gets approved, and then they go work on it for 6 to 8 weeks, and then they present their product or their findings to that same room of community members, and a large portion of their grade is based on the feedback of these professionals who are in the room. When I talked to these kids about this, they all expressed things like, it's the most nerve-wracking and stressful thing that I've ever done, and at the same time, it's the most rewarding thing that I've ever got to do. And they all felt like it did a much better job of preparing them for what might come in their future. The other thing is that these kids had the self-regulation to understand whether or not they should have homework. The teacher never assigned homework. It was up to these kids to understand, okay, I've got this much work to do in the next 6 to 8 weeks, and they were able to spread it out over time, know how much they were able to get done during the day, and then they could decide, okay, is this something that I can finish during the day at school, or is it something I need to go home and work on that night? And the fact that they're choosing whether or not they have homework, has much greater value than something that's just assigned to them. Just one size fits all kind of homework that we do a lot of times in school today. So I mean, those are coming to mind right away.
So what do you say, me being devil's advocate here, what do you say to those people that a lot of those kids in the scenario that you just said might never learn the quadratic equation? Is that important? I mean, how?
I would say when was the last time you used the quadratic equation, Matt?
Probably when I tiled my floor, but that was, I mean, I could have YouTubed that. So.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the point, right? I think if I could add a fourth to then something that comes to mind is teaching kids how to learn. So the kids who need to learn how to do the quadratic formula, they'll learn it when they need to.
So what does that say about standards, learning standards?
Well, I think those standards have to be based more on skills, right? So the kids who are going to be successful in the future have a very diverse set of skills.
So more like the ISTE standards rather than the state learning standard.
Right. I would say it's something more along the lines of the ISTE standards, where we have a set of skills. Now, we're still going to teach content. The content is the context for which we teach these skills, right? But the focus should be much more on skills. The problem with doing that is that that's really hard to assess on something like a standardized test. It would be very expensive too, right? So the reason why I think we're not doing that is because of those constraints of, this is hard to assess and it's expensive to assess.
Well, and right now funding is tied to assessment and benchmarks. Right. And so all that is going to have to change as well. So will teacher training. I mean, to be able to facilitate a room full of kids not learning the way you learned, is going to have to be a complete paradigm shift in teacher prep.
Totally agree. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to be said for, you spend 12 years in a classroom with a teacher teaching you a certain way. That's kind of what's ingrained in us. And it's very kind of natural and intuitive to want to teach people the exact same way you were taught.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with my wife that I probably should go back to the classroom. I've been out a while, but if I did, I would be a completely different teacher. But then it would be so hard, even as long as I've been out of the classroom, not to fall back into those habits.
Agreed. It would be really hard. Teachers have one of the hardest jobs of anybody I know. And I totally respect everything that teachers are doing.
Well, there's so much change. I mean,
I wish there was just things that policymakers in society would do to make their jobs easier. Because it's for example, so I believe it's Singapore where this happens. They take the top 10% of the high school graduating class and offer them a full ride scholarship to go to school if they're going to be a teacher. So they get free college tuition to go into education. They also get a stipend while they're in college so that they can focus on their studies and not worry about working. And then when these people graduate, they're held in the same regard as, scientists or doctors or lawyers or engineers, where you think about it in the United States, anybody can become a teacher. There's very little a screening process. Teachers graduate with $40,000 to $60,000 in debt. They get a job making $30,000 a year, and society blames them for everything that's wrong with kids.
Right.
And the last time I looked, we have a shortfall of 390,000 teachers in the United States. So, the odds are stacked against teachers, and there's nobody doing anything to make their job easier.
Yeah. All right. One final question, Eric, and then I'm going to let you go. What do we tell teachers who find all this change to be tiring. They pretty much to the teacher, everyone that I've been in contact with expresses some sort of frustration. Why, like, it's just another thing. The administration's always bringing one more thing at us. It's going too fast. What do we say to that?
Yeah. It's difficult to know what to tell the teacher. I have an idea of what's causing the frustration. What a teacher can do about it is a lot harder to come up with because of the position that they're in within a school district or the district as an organization, right? I think that the teachers who say it's just another thing, it's just another initiative, it's a result of that lack of planning and lack of unified vision.
I knew you were going to go there. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
yeah,
that's exactly why. That's totally why it happens. Now, what a teacher can do about that, I don't know. I mean, I've yet to find very many districts where a group of teachers could go to the superintendent and say, "Hey, this is going too fast. It's changing too much. This isn't working for us." I mean,
or why do we have this one more thing? And then can the superintendent then say, "Here's how it all fits. Here's the big picture and the scheme of things."
Yeah. I don't. Maybe it exists, and I've just never seen it. But I worked with an awful lot of schools, and it's just not very common. I think that I would love, well, without going off on a tangent, I wish I knew. I wish I knew what to tell those teachers. I guess what I would say is to, what's the saying? Ask for forgiveness rather than asking for permission. Do what you want to do in your classroom, and if it works, then go tell your superintendent or your principal or your school board about it. If it doesn't, the majority of schools aren't meeting yearly adequate progress or whatever. I forget what that's called. We're not succeeding on these standardized tests anyway. So why not try something new and be bold? And eventually, I really feel confident that a lot of these new approaches that teachers could take will start working. I understand there's a lot that comes along with that, like parents not necessarily being on board with some teacher trying something new with students, because if it doesn't work, well, then it impacts their students. It's a very thorny subject, and I wish I had an easy answer for them.
Well, how about this? Let's have the takeaway be bold. Because I think be bold. Yeah. If education it's like those algebra problems. The train leaves the station at midnight and one train is going 5 miles an hour. That would be education. And another train is going 50 miles an hour. That would be technology innovation. And then you can see how tech innovation is exponentially. The gap is widening so fast. And I think people can see that with their own phones. Teachers are all willing to learn how to use their phone for personal whatever. Mm-hmm. And how do they reconcile that with what they're teaching? And so I think it's going to take teachers being bold to take big steps.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe the last thing I'll say is that you just made me think of was I think about those kids at the school in Florida that rallied on Twitter and got people to talk about the gun conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Now, they're taking a stance one way or another on guns. But I think about how, what a group of like 10 or so high school kids, how they started a national conversation about what happened. Well, how many thousands of teachers are there? And they have access to social media and technology. I mean, imagine if teachers organized and used social media to talk about these problems that we have in the schools with their working conditions, the lack of training, the lack of pay. I mean, Dr. Martin Luther King got 500,000 people to show up in Washington with no email, with no social media. Imagine what somebody like what Dr. King could do today. I think the tools are there. And if we want to make that type of change, I think it's totally within the realm of possibility. It's just a matter if we're going to choose to do it or not.
So it sounds like you and I need to organize a march or something.
Let's do it. Yeah, Twitter march.
There you go.
A Twitter storm on parents, and everyone else in the world.
That's a great place to draw a line for today, Eric. I could have a conversation with you for quite a while yet, but I appreciate your time today. I think there's been some really good takeaways, and your wisdom as an educator and a thinker in the industry is impressive. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. It's always fun to spend time with you, and and you always push my thinking, which I love surrounding myself with people like you. So thanks again.
Well, yeah. And thank all of you out there for listening to the Teacher's Classroom, which is part of the Illinois Area 5 Professional Development and Innovation Initiative. I'm your host, Matt Weld. Please subscribe to this podcast and share this awesome episode with all of your colleagues. You can follow Teach Illinois on Twitter at TeachILPD, and I can be found on Twitter at Matthew Weld. You can find and subscribe to the Teacher's Classroom on pretty much wherever you find your podcast. And until the next time, I hope each of you out there have a fantastic rest of your day.